Welcome to the 129th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's podium. For over a century, this stage has united visionaries and leaders from politics, business, community, and the arts to share insights on the most pressing issues of our time. And with Canada in a pivotal moment, it's more important than ever that we come together.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to those joining us online. My name is Shazanne Chu, President of Canadian Club Toronto, and your host. For generations, the Canada-U.S. relationship has served as a cornerstone of trade, investment, innovation, and economic growth. Today, we'll hear firsthand perspectives on the opportunities and challenges shaping the next chapter of cross-border cooperation between our two countries. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the organizations whose support makes today's event possible. Today's event sponsors are BMO Financial Group, EY Canada, McKinsey & Company, and CPA Ontario. Thank you for your generous support. We're also grateful to our seasoned sponsors, Canadian Bankers Association, the Carpenters Regional Council, and our official airline sponsor, Air Canada. And to Canada's Forest Trust, who's our nature partner who helps us reduce our carbon footprint by planting a smart forest in our honor. We're also pleased to welcome students from the Toronto Metropolitan University and the University of Toronto's Political Science program. Now, before we move on, let me take a moment to remind you of our website and its on-demand content and event information. Please visit canadianclub.org, and while you're there, consider becoming a member if you haven't already done so. And now I'm sure you'll have questions about Canada-U.S. relations, trade, investment, and North American competitiveness. So please use the question cards on your tables. And for those joining us remotely, please use the Submit a Question button on the right-hand side of your screen. Our team will look out for them and share them with today's moderator. And now, it is my pleasure to invite Gillian Riley, President of the Conference Board of Canada and past President of Canadian Club Toronto, to introduce today's speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction. It is my pleasure to join you today. My name is Gillian Riley, and I'm the President of the Conference Board of Canada. For me, this is a bit of a homecoming. I had the privilege of serving as President of the Canadian Club. So to stand here today, partnering on this event as the President of the re-established Conference Board of Canada, feels like a natural extension of that rich history, working alongside friends as we seek to build Canada forward. So thank you to the Canadian Club for having me today. And it is a remarkable moment. Leaders are describing this as a once-in-a-generation window, with the country looking to mobilize on the order of $1 trillion in the coming years. Capital is moving in a way it has not in close to 2 decades because economies everywhere are looking for partners they can rely on over the long term. And Canada has ample opportunities to lead. Canada has every raw ingredient to be a top global player: massive land, critical mineral wealth, abundant energy, a highly educated population, and geographic security. Realizing that potential will take ambition and coordination, but the demand is real and the advantage is genuinely ours. At the Conference Board, we are in an exciting period of renewal and regeneration. The Global Conference Board has spent more than a century helping leaders worldwide navigate critical business and societal issues. We are an independent, nonpartisan, and highly trusted member-driven organization with more than 2,000 member companies. There are 20,000 executives who engage annually through the Conference Board's research and over 150 invitation-only peer-to-peer councils, and of course, several events globally. We have offices in New York, Brussels, Beijing, Hong Kong, Singapore, and now re-establishing operations in Canada. With the opportunity came to lead our re-entry in Canada, I did not hesitate, because this platform will allow me to assist in creating the very best Canada in a global community. And while much of the current sentiment is focused, understandably, on the future of Canada-U.S. relations, we also carry long-standing challenges related to diversifying our economic partnerships, accelerating investment here at home, and meeting AI adoption and productivity head-on. These are exactly the kind of challenges where understanding what our global peers are doing and being connected to the right people and the right insights can clarify our path forward and open doors for Canadian business leaders to step forward with confidence. My goal for the Conference Board of Canada is to ensure our business leaders are navigating the next decade with the best global thinking and opportunities within reach. Et permettez-moi d'ajouter quelques mots en français. Le Conference Board du Canada accompagne les chefs d'entreprise en favorisant la compréhension économique et un dialogue éclairé entre dirigeants, décideurs et institutions. Notre approche est simple: allier l'expertise locale à une perspective mondiale et mettre les dirigeants en relation par des forums confidentiels et des échanges entre pairs de haut niveau. Et c'est précisément le dialogue que nous attendons aujourd'hui. 2 dirigeants canadiens d'exception qui échangeront sur l'avenir de la relation entre le Canada et les États-Unis. And now to today's conversation. It promises to be relevant, important, and engaging at a key time. CUSMA links 500 million consumers into a single multi-trillion-dollar trade bloc and strengthens North American competitiveness overall. The rules of North American trade are being rewritten in real time, and there are few people better placed to discuss what comes next than the two who are joining us today. Our first guest, Ambassador Mark D. Wiseman, took up his post as Canada's ambassador to the United States earlier this year after 3 decades as CEO, senior executive, and investment manager, including leadership of the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board and a senior role at BlackRock. There are few Canadians better placed to represent Canada's interest in Washington at a pivotal moment between our two countries. Joining him in conversation is Darryl White, Chief Executive Officer at BMO Financial Group. Darryl has spent more than 3 decades with BMO and led the organization since 2017. Under his leadership, BMO has expanded its North American presence and strengthened its positions as one of the continent's leading financial institution. He's also a highly respected voice on economic growth, competitiveness, and Canada-U.S. economic relations. And both of these gentlemen are part of the Prime Minister's U.S.-Canada Economic Relations Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Mark D. Wiseman and CEO Darryl White to Canada's podium.
All right, this is an important conversation at an important time, and I hope we're also going to have a little bit of fun while we're here. But let me just say off the top, the ambassador and I have known each other for a long time in a lot of forums, in a lot of roles.
No stories.
There will be no stories, but I will make one point. I have had the benefit of knowing the ambassador for quite a long period of time in a lot of roles where he has been engaged, competent, excited, all about follow-up and follow-through. And as I think about the conversations we've had over the last several months, I have never, I mean this, I have never seen you as energized, as engaged, and this is a high bar for him to cover of his own record, and committed to the mission on behalf of Canadians as I'm seeing right now. So I think we should all just thank Mark for his service to Canada.
You know, in investing, Darryl, I always said to my investment teams that deploying capital was easy. Bringing it back with a return was much harder, and so maybe you should save your thanks until there's a return on the investment.
It is true that I get the last word, so we'll see how it goes. All right, but I have the fun of being able to ask the questions today for a change. So let's start with your 4 months in.
4 months today.
4 months today.
4 months.
Happy month anniversary. Sounds like teenagers, right? So 4 months in, give us your review. What have you learned, including perhaps what surprised you as you came in with, you know, I've talked about a little bit of a unique background relative to folks who come into these roles.
So let me start by saying what's unusual about, there's a lot of things that are unusual about me, but what's unusual about me in this role is that I'm 4 months as Canada's ambassador to the United States. I'm 4 months as a diplomat. I'm 4 months as a government employee. And for people in my role, that's quite unusual. Most people who take on these types of roles, be it for Canada or for another country, and especially by the time you get to Washington in your career, you've got a lot of experience as a diplomat. And as some of my friends said when I was appointed, they said, seriously, you're going to be Canada's ambassador to the United States? You're the least diplomatic human being we've ever met. And then they paused and they said, but maybe that's exactly what we need in Washington right now. So there's a lot the bottom line is there's a lot to learn. And one of the things that's very fortunate, and I think all Canadians should know, is that we have an incredible team, not just in Washington, but across our 13 consulates in the United States, and then an incredible team to support all of that in Ottawa as well. But it really is a team effort, and it has to be a team effort because of the size and complexity of the relationship that we have with the United States of America. And that's been my big surprise. My big surprise is just how complex the relationship is between our two countries. Just, you know, to put a few things in perspective, there's 120 million border crossings a year across the Canada-U.S. border. On average, it takes about 10 seconds to process somebody who's crossing the border. The complexity and the organization that it takes to make that work is unbelievable. There's $2.4 billion of goods a day that cross the border. Again, most of it happens seamlessly. We don't even think about it. And then there's all kinds of other things like air traffic control. Just to use a simple example. You know, if you get on a plane in Vancouver and you fly to Toronto, you're likely flying across the United States. If you get in a plane to Seattle and you fly to Boston, you're likely flying over Canada. That kind of works day in and day out, not to mention NORAD, not to mention controlling water levels on the Great Lakes, not to mention any number of other things that go on between our countries and the complex ecosystem each and every day. And almost all of that happens seamlessly, without an issue, without politics or politicians or tweets or Truth Socials. It just happens and it works to the benefit of both countries. And so to me, kind of all the hard stuff around trade, which I'm sure we'll get into, I kind of expected. But what I didn't really expect was all the other things that go on.
The foundational layers.
And that work. Yeah. That work. And there's hardworking Americans and Canadians each and every day that just make sure that it works. And again, we shouldn't take that for granted.
Before we get into trade, we talked about give us your sense now in Washington, most of the time for the last 4 months to the day, what's the mood as it relates to Canada? Feels like we're obsessed with the United States and Canada. There are a lot of things on the U.S. agenda other than Canada. But when it comes to Canada, what's the mood? How far apart are we? Away from the rhetoric and the tweets and the social.
Yeah, so
the real conversation.
I'm going to take a little bit of time on this answer because it's nuanced. The first thing I would say is that Americans don't wake up every day thinking about Canada. We are obsessed, for good reason, with the United States. They're not obsessed with us, maybe for like heated rivalry or something, with Olympic gold medal hockey game. But by and large, Americans do not have naturally the obsession that we have with the United States. And the United States is actually undergoing quite tumultuous times, right? We all understand that. There's been the conflict in the Middle East. There was, this is all, by the way, since I started, in 4 months since I started. Right? When I started, there was no conflict in the Middle East. Nope. There was no invasion of Venezuela. There was, a whole bunch of primaries that have taken place as we head in to the midterm elections. There's inflation. There's a new Fed chair. There's any number of things that are going on either inside or in relation to the United States that are more pressing, that are higher in the news cycle than Canada. And you just have to pick up any U.S. paper. It doesn't matter. It could be the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. Canada's not on the front page. And so we just have to remember, first and foremost, that there's a lot of things going on in the United States of America at a very complex time for their country, politically, socially, economically, that doesn't involve us. So that's the first thing I would say, is that we're not top of mind, and we have to, we'd like to be more top of mind at some measure. Second thing I would say is there's a very big difference between Congress, meaning the elected members of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the executive branch of the United States, meaning the President and his cabinet. Inside Congress are people that have districts or states that they represent, and they tend to have they've been there for a longer period of time, many of them multiple terms, and they tend to have a much better understanding and have had constant engagement in terms of the importance of the relationship between Canada and their district or Canada and their state. Remember, there's 13 states that border Canada. We are the largest buyer, the largest export market for almost 30 states. We're essentially a top 3 export market for pretty much every state in the United States. So when you're meeting with congressional leaders, they've kind of have had a longer set of experiences and have a very local understanding of the relationship. It could be tourism. It could be because we're buying a certain product that is produced in their district or in their state. Yeah. It could be that Canadians own businesses there's Canadian-owned businesses, and Bank of Montreal being one of them, that are employing people in their district and their state. So those are easier, both sides of the aisle, easier conversations to have. The administration is working, the administration meaning the executive branch, has less experience specifically. They don't have specific districts where there's a connectivity, and they are focused on fundamentally changing the nature of U.S. policy, both domestically and internationally. And that means that those conversations are more difficult, harder to get their attention, and also potentially more at odds with the direction that they have stated that they want to go in terms of changing the policy direction of the United States. So I kind of, for those who haven't been to Washington, to the Canadian Embassy, by the way, I literally have the best office.
You have the cool, I told you this before you went. He said to me, I've never seen the office. I always went to visit our ambassadors prior. He has the coolest office I have ever been in. Anyway.
So for those who don't know, Canada is the only embassy on Pennsylvania Avenue. We sit about halfway between the Capitol and the White House, and my office has this kind of 180-degree glass window, and I overlook the Capitol building. It's literally the best.
You know all those the press setup that you see when people walk out there? You've seen it 100 times, whether it's with the ambassador or the prime minister or anybody. That's from the balcony of the office that we're talking about.
And I kind of look over the Capitol. I think it's going to be like one of those movies like Independence Day. I'm always waiting for something like aliens. But when I look at my office at the Capitol, you know, those tend to be easier conversations to have than if I look to my right of my office to where you know, Treasury and Commerce and Agriculture and the executive offices are. So it's interesting, and I've kind of learned in the last 4 months that you have to navigate both branches, those two branches quite differently. The third branch, of course, being the judiciary.
Let's talk about trade. Kuzma, in this room, Kuzma. Can you take the group back a little bit and then go forward? Back a little bit. Just a reminder on what this is and what it isn't. Renegotiation versus review, I think, is a helpful reminder for everybody. And then, where do you think we are, and where do you think we're going?
Okay. So, everybody take a deep breath. Relax. It's all going to be okay. And it's going to be okay because we have an agreement with the United States and Mexico that expires. It expires at 11:59 p.m. on June 30th, 2036. We all have to keep that in mind. It is a 16-year agreement that was signed in 2020. And unlike our last negotiation, there's no cliff, as our chief negotiator, Janice Charette, has said. We're not falling off a cliff. We're not falling off a cliff on July the 1st. In fact, nothing really happens. I'll explain to you what happens on July the 1st of this year, but nothing really happens because the agreement has 10 years to go until it comes to its end. Under the four corners of the agreement, there is a review period that takes place, and the opening of that review period is July the 1st. And that is an opportunity for all three parties to the agreement to raise issues about the agreement's operations and to try and resolve them. And starting on the 1st of July, it's not a one-day deal, the parties may decide to renew the agreement. And renewal of the agreement means you restart the 16-year clock. So in effect, a renewal of the agreement means you extend it from 2036 to 2042. That's what's up for grabs in terms of renewal. If it's not renewed, the agreement remains in force until 2036. So when we're talking about the renewal of CUSMA, we're really talking about an extension or a potential extension of the agreement for an additional 6 years to 2042. Now, it is true that the agreement can be canceled. And that cancellation...
But that's always been true.
That's always been true. So the agreement, the day it was signed, the next day it can be canceled on 6 months' notice. Today it can be canceled on 6 months' notice. 6 years from now it can be canceled on 6 months' notice. But that's always been true. And no one, including Ambassador Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, or the President, have suggested that they would intend to cancel the agreement. In fact, quite the opposite. The USTR has publicly come out, Ambassador Greer has publicly come out and said that the U.S., like Canada, like Mexico, wants to preserve those foundational pillars of the CUSMA agreement. So we're going into a period now of review where the U.S. has put certain issues on the table that it would like to see modified. We've put issues on the table that we would like to see modified.
Irritants.
And Mexico has put issues on the table that it would like to see modified. We will work through those issues, but the backdrop is there's no cliff. It doesn't matter if we work through those issues and conclude that review on July the 2nd, or conclude that review in January, or if we never, frankly, conclude the review, the agreement, the base case is that the agreement remains in place through till 2036. Now, I want to put a big caveat because there's a big
232.
There's a big, incredibly important caveat, which are the sectoral tariffs, the 232s. So those tariffs are the ones that are biting in terms of impact on the Canadian economy, Canadian business, Canadian workers. And those sectoral tariffs are sitting outside and are arguably in violation of CUSMA. And in particular, that's steel, aluminum, autos, and then the additional tariffs, 232 tariffs on top of what is already a complicated story for Canadian forest products. Those tariffs we need to find a path forward on quickly because unlike everything else under CUSMA/USMCA, the default is they're staying in place. And they are incredibly painful to wide sectors of the Canadian economy. So the focus of the negotiating team, again led by Minister LeBlanc and our chief negotiator, the focus for us is trying to find a way through those sectoral 232 tariffs, and that's the issue. So we can take a deep breath on the CUSMA review,
and let's defang July 1st.
And let's defang. And July 1st doesn't matter, but we've got as quick as we can. I won't say July 1st doesn't matter because it's technically the opening of the review period, and the renewal when the renewal window opens. But the 232s we've got to deal with as quickly and effectively as we can because they are hurting us.
Let's broaden the aperture. Folks in this room either directly or represent people who trade with the world, not just the United States. I've spent a lot of time, including the setup of our business, talking about what I truly believe is advantage North America. I mean, at the end of the day, on this continent, we have the best neighbors, not perfect, but the best neighbors of anywhere in the world if you had to choose over the course of time. We have the best talent, we have the best tech, we have the best capital markets, and we have the best resources, all on this continent in North America. It's a hell of a neighborhood to live in the world. And at the same time, the Prime Minister has been doing great work to expand Canada's potential around the world with a view to diversifying. How does the advantage of North America align with the push to do more with the rest of the world? And are those things in conflict?
So the short answer is they're not in conflict at all. In fact, I believe that they're complementary. But it's an and, it's not an or. So it's not about diversifying to the rest of the world at the expense of our relationship with the United States. And the Prime Minister was very clear on this point in the speech he made at the Economic Club of New York a couple of weeks ago. And we are privileged. Let's be clear. We as Canadians are privileged to be next door to the world's most dynamic economy, to the world's largest economy, to the world's most innovative economy. We should not seek to trade that for anything. I would argue that every country in the world would like to have the geographic connectivity and the economic connectivity that we have as Canadians with the United States of America. But with that has come a degree of complacency, and I think that's what
an over-reliance.
An over-reliance, and I think that's what the Prime Minister has said. And so, when we think about it, the fact that 3/4 of our trade goes south, we need to think about diversifying away. Now, if you look at the government's target, the Prime Minister said that he wants Canada to double its trade with the rest of the world over the next 10 years. It's not relative to the United States. It's an absolute target. We should be growing our relationship and trade with the United States at the same time. I saw some of my former colleagues from CPPIB in the audience, and when I started at CPPIB, almost 80% of our assets were in Canada, which was unhealthy. When I left CPPIB over a decade later, we had only about 20% of our assets in Canada. But we never sold a Canadian asset. We grew everything else. And so we shouldn't be selling the United States. We should just be growing everything else faster than we're growing the United States. And by the way, we have been growing the United States. Since we signed the CUSMA agreement in 2020, trade with the United States is up 27%. I hope in the next 6 years it's up more than it did, and I'm sure the Prime Minister feels the same way, more than 27%. I hope our trade with the rest of the world grows at an even faster pace. And this should be, a challenge for Canada, a wake-up call. We have been too complacent. We have been too reliant. We need to diversify our sources of demand for our products. We need to look to build infrastructure to allow us to go east and west, not just north and south. But we don't have to do that at the expense of the relationship, and nor should we do that necessarily at the expense of the relationship with the United States. And by the way, again, I'm repeating what the Prime Minister said, a strong, resilient, self-reliant, more diversified Canada is great for us, but it's also great for the United States of America. The United States wants a continental partner who can help exploit and strengthen this continent that is self-reliant and strong and able to build and stand on its own 2 feet. The perfect example of that is on defense.
Exactly.
And so, a strong Canada that's self-reliant and living up to its commitments that it's made in terms of defense spending is great for the United States of America. And so is a Canada that's building the energy infrastructure that it needs. And so is a Canada that's building the AI and data infrastructure that it needs. And so is a Canada that's building the human resources and talent structure that it needs. That's great for the United States. And so when the Prime Minister said in New York that Canada strong helps make America great again, it actually resonates. It's what the U.S. is sort of asking us in many respects to do. And we should take up that challenge, not for the United States, but for ourselves.
Put your old hat back on. You're an investor. You're pretty good at it. One of your jobs is to sell Canada to Americans. I'm not talking about the trade file anymore. But when I've heard you say before, I'm long Canada. What's your sales pitch when you're in those places, through the consulates, in the different parts of the United States, not just in Washington on the political class or the trade file, on why here for investment, for talent, for research, why?
So first of all, I start with some of the comments that were made earlier. I mean, we are an incredibly well-endowed country, not just in natural resources, but as I've talked about many times previously, in terms of the human talent and the human capital that we've developed in this country. We have an incredibly resilient, educated, multicultural, global population. And then when we combine that population with our resources and the innovative businesses that we've built and are building, I mean, there's no better country with opportunity than there is this one. So the first thing is, I mean, I think that selling Canada is easy. And, as we say many times, it turns out we happen to have a lot of the things that the world wants today, be it critical minerals, be it energy, be it a climate that is I keep talking about data centers. I mean, building a data center in Houston is crazy. And it's crazy because you're spending a massive amount of your energy just on ambient cooling. Last time I checked, we got ambient cooling kind of figured out in this, even this morning when I woke up. My God, it's supposed to be June in Toronto. So we've got all the pieces of the puzzle that to take ourselves to the next level.
So we do, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to. The pushback I could imagine being, with all of that, your unemployment is higher than the U.S., your GDP growth is lower, your productivity stinks, and you're overregulated. Why?
Well, thankfully,
now should I invest?
Thankfully, I'm just the ambassador. No one elected me or has to re-elect me. No, look, we got to get our act. Darryl, you know this. We talk about this all the time, and we've got to get our act together. Productivity is probably the best measure to see where that gap not only exists but has been growing. We've got to be more innovative. We've got to take more risks. We've got to invest more in our own country, and we need to build the critical infrastructure to be able to enable the private sector to take us where we need to go in terms of productivity growth. And for God's sake, we've got to get out of our own way, including with things like interprovincial trade barriers. So we've been really good at getting in our own way, and I think the famous saying, "Don't waste a crisis." We've got a bit of a crisis here, and we will waste it if we don't get our act together and become more self-sufficient and more resilient and more diversified. Now, the government has a role to play in that, for sure. They should be held accountable, but so should our business community. We need to take more risk in our own country. We need to invest more in research and development. The government should help that along with policies and incentives. But at the end of the day, it's got to be a partnership between the private sector and the public sector that's going to get us there. So that's part of my sales pitch, which is, I'm biased, but I believe the government is heading in the right direction in terms of dealing with those impediments. I also think, though, it's important to remind Americans as part of the sales pitch as why Canada is important to the United States. And we don't do a very good job at that. As I said earlier, we are a huge market. We buy more American-made automobiles than any country in the world other than the United States. We buy more American-made automobiles than Japan, Germany, China combined. We buy individual Canadians on average by 40 times the dollar amount of American goods than most other countries combined. And I can't remember the exact countries, but it's like the UK, China, and Japan, something like that. I mean, we buy a massive amount of American.
And as you pointed out earlier, we're the #1 customer to 30 states.
30 states. But not only that, Americans understand, rightly, that they are energy self-sufficient, meaning that they produce approximately the amount of energy that they consume. But Americans also import 4 million barrels of oil a day from Canada. Why? Because it's much more efficient to do that and then export 4 million barrels from the Gulf and otherwise. So we're creating the balance in the American for American energy. So if you think about it, the 4 million barrels they bring in from us permits them to export 4 million barrels and remain energy sufficient. We need to remind Americans, and that's true of business as well as our political leaders, of how important we are to them. And, you know, there is an America First policy in place, for sure. But America First doesn't mean America alone, and nor does it mean Canada second. And we need to explain that for the U.S. to achieve what they want to achieve, they need us to do it. And we need to do a better job reminding them.
So when the president says we don't need Canada, we don't need Canada's lumber, we don't need Canada's oil, we don't need Canada, what he really means is we do need Canada. We just want to have the best deal we can get.
The president is the negotiator in chief.
Right.
And he's good at it.
Right.
And you know, I would tell you that the discussions that we are having daily, including today at the G7, where Minister LeBlanc and our chief negotiator are there, along with Ambassador Greer and others from the U.S. government. It's not a formal negotiation. They all happen to be in the same place, and I'm sure they will run into each other on the sidelines of those meetings. Those discussions are productive, serious, informed, and respectful is the way that I would describe them. So you can take the negotiator in chief's position, but what I can tell you, just between us, like behind the scenes, stuff is getting done on a rational, collaborative, intelligent, and business-like.
And may I say, of all the adjectives that you chose, respectful was an important one.
I'm going to say
go
one
ahead.
last,
Then
one
we
last
got
thing.
a chance for one more because we're getting the sign here.
Yeah, and the one last thing I just say is that you asked me at the first question you asked me about my surprise. The other one is I thought I was going to walk into a bit of a buzzsaw in Washington when I showed up. It's been the opposite.
Yeah.
My welcome to Washington at every level, including my meeting with the president in the Oval Office when I presented my credentials on the 17th of February, which was a record. It usually takes 4 to 6 months from when you arrive to when you present your credentials and you officially become the ambassador. It was 38 hours for me, and the U.S. did that for a reason. And every meeting that I've had, every discussion that I've had has been respectful, and I've been treated, there's like 180 ambassadors in Washington. Canada really, and I have been treated as the first among equals. We really do have a special relationship, and that comes through in every meeting that I've had.
So that's encouraging. And last question. There are understandably pessimists among us in Canada as a result of what the last year and a half have felt like. What do you say to those folks to give them comfort? Let's make it easy. In 5 years, or don't make it easy, do whatever you want. You're on the spot, not me. In 5 years, 10 years, what does this relationship look like? And can you give those people some optimism against the concern level that we all experience every day? Because we in this country obsess with this, and our American friends don't.
Look, I don't want to suggest this is easy. The irritants, you called them irritants. So I'll use your word. It's been used by others. They're real, and some of them are very hard to manage through.
Yeah,
they're very hard to manage through, and there is not alignment of interest on every issue. All of us in this room know what some of the hard ones are, right? Forest products, softwood lumber has been an issue between our two countries for 4 decades or more. Dairy products, very tough issue because of the position that we've taken on supply management. We have policy reasons and reasons why we've decided to do that. It's very hard for the U.S. To understand that when they want more access to our market. So let's be clear. These discussions aren't easy, and the 232s are nettlesome, really nettlesome, right? I mean, you look at steel, there's overcapacity on both sides of the border in terms of steel production. We're both fighting against the imports of subsidized foreign product as well. So, the issues are difficult. The reason ultimately to be optimistic goes back to the way that I frame it, which is it's in each of our interests to get this right.
Yeah.
And it's in the U.S.'s interest to get this right. They need Canada. They need a cogent trading relationship with us. They need a cogent defense relationship with us. They need a cogent people relationship with us. And we need the same with them. And so maybe I'm old-fashioned, but, at the end of the day, there's a mutuality of interest that will get us to the right place. It may take time. It may take more time than we want, and we may have more uncertainty than makes us all comfortable. But we're in a world today, unfortunately, that is unbelievably uncertain, and that uncertainty goes well beyond the Canada-U.S. relationship. And so people that keep saying, well, I'd love to get some certainty. I want more certainty. We're not in a particularly certain world today, and we're going to have to live, I think, for a little bit longer with uncertainty. That may be around the trade relationship, it may be more broadly, but I am optimistic, Darryl, that we will get to the right place because it's in our interest. The United States has been around for 250 years, not without turbulence. We've been around for 159. We're not moving out of the neighborhood, and neither are they. And so we'll do what's in our interests and figure it out.
And we'll stay as friends with benefits.
We'll stay with friends as benefits.
Okay, we unfortunately are out of time. We could do this all day, but I began by thanking the ambassador for his service to Canada, and I'm going to end with a gift. And we checked, and it falls under your gift policy. You're all going to be good. Don't get nervous. There is another global event going on right now in North America, you might have noticed, called the World Cup. And FIFA, go Canada. You all have scarves. And I couldn't let the moment pass without, as the Bank of Soccer and as the sponsor of the men's national team and the women's national team, by the way, without presenting you with a Team Canada jersey from Alphonso Davies, who's our captain. And thank you. Thank you for representing Canada.
Thank you.
Yes, okay, here? Okay.
Ambassador Wiseman, thank you for your insights on one of the most important relationships shaping Canada's future. And Darryl, thank you for guiding such an important discussion from your vantage leading one of North America's largest financial institutions. Thank you. Jillian, thanks to you, to the Conference Board of Canada for partnering with us on today's event. And once again, thank you to BMO Financial Group, EY Canada, McKinsey & Company, and CPA Ontario for making today's event possible. Sincere thanks to our production partner, VVC Live, for their continued professionalism and support. Tomorrow, we close our 25-26 season with a discussion featuring CIOs from Canada and the United States on the current landscape of investment challenges and opportunities, and I'm sure we'll bring up some of the topics discussed today. Please visit CanadianClub.org for details on how to tune in, membership information, and access to our extensive library for on-demand content. Members and guests, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a wonderful afternoon.